Namaste. Bitches. We were at breakfast this morning, and this has nothing to do with the topic, by the way, but I just have this burning question. At the next table, there was a table of four. Couldn't quite figure out all the relationships. 3 men and a woman. I know that there was one of the men was married to the woman, and one of the men seemed to be one of their parents. He was older. And who the fourth guy was, I have no idea. But they were talking about golf. And I don't know if you know much about golf, but generally speaking, in golf, on an 18-hole course, 72 is a par score. So if you only play 9 holes, it tends to be 36 on a full-length course. You also need to know that 70% of golfers do not shoot under 100 on a regular basis. So when we're talking about par, we're talking about a really small percentage of golfers. Because of those that break 100 on a regular basis, not all of them are down at 72. And we'll call him Dad, the guy who seemed to be somebody's parent, was talking about somebody who shot a 36 yesterday. And the woman said, "Oh, well, that's par." So here's the question that popped into my mind. Which group are the bigger liars? Golfers or people who fish? But they lie in opposite directions. You know, the fisherman says there was more, the golfer says there was less. And what does a golfer who's a fisherman do, or a fisherwoman, to keep those two things straight?
You're thinking too hard.
I know.
You enjoying your breakfast if you're eavesdropping?
Yeah, well, they were, as Kramer would say, they were loud talkers.
You couldn't help it.
Yeah, it was like blasting. It was louder than the ambient noise by a significant degree. But it might be tangentially related to treating all people with dignity and respect.
Because you're obviously thinking respectfully of these people.
Well, and I'm wondering,
But he didn't call them out in public.
no, well, and from my perspective, I mean, somebody who shoots par gets a lot of respect from me. I don't know. I wouldn't be. It's sort of like somebody who if somebody bowled a perfect game, or and somebody else said, "Well, they did it once." I mean, I need the things in the gutters, you know. So to me, it's all yeah.
I've managed to get gutter balls with the things in the gutters.
Just at the very end there where they don't cover? Yeah. Me too.
That's a skill.
It is. If you think about it, you know, there's an accuracy there that if you could just shift it over a few feet. And I don't know if I'm embarrassed. I didn't really research whether that phrase, treat all people with dignity and respect, is a part of everybody's baptismal covenant, or if it's just in the Episcopal Church, if it's part of their baptismal covenant. That's where I heard it most often, and it became one of those things. It's one of the questions. Will you, I don't even remember the whole question, but will you something, treating all people with dignity and respect?
I don't think that's in ours.
Is it?
And it's definitely not part of the doctrine of West.
In the Roman Church, okay. And I really intended to look it up. But it didn't happen, obviously. But it's a really, to me, important concept, whether it's in a baptismal covenant or not, because we fail at it so regularly. And, I'm condemning myself in that. We don't have, for the most part, a very hard time treating people that are very much like us with dignity and respect. I would say, you don't need the hot flash fan yet? I would say, that's right, our flasher is absent. I would say that generally, the more people are like us, the easier it is for us to give them a pass. And the more different from us people are, the less likely it is we'll give them a pass. And some of that, I think, is linked in the bias towards negativity we were talking about before we started, the psychological phenomenon that's probably part of our evolution and the reason we're sitting here, that when something approaches, we are likely to assume at first it's a threat. Because if we were a cave person, that just made more sense. If you made a mistake in evaluating something that was safe as a threat, well, big deal. If you made a mistake in evaluating something that was a threat as being safe, it would probably be your last mistake. And so we carry that with us. We carry a lot of stuff with us that we have learned to step away from, learned to feel but ignore, or feel and reinterpret. And particularly in our political climate today, on both sides of the aisle, dignity and respect are in short supply. I would argue dignity and self-respect are in short supply. And it was as much this reading from James as the gospel that kept, as I reflected on it, bringing up this idea of treating all people with dignity and respect. James is the book that Luther would have gotten rid of. Revelation is the book that Craig would have gotten rid of, but they didn't poll me. But James really is that voice pointing to orthopraxis instead of orthodoxy, or maybe in addition to orthodoxy, that it's not just a matter of what you believe, it's a matter of what you do with it. And James always takes me back to my days at Trinity Church Episcopal, as opposed to Trinity Episcopal Church in the village of Wauwatosa, where where James's encouragement about the poor was perhaps most blatantly disregarded. There had been a lovely renovation prior to me getting there, and 2 large rooms were added on to the church, along with other remodeling being done, and a new church offices. And one large room became what most places would call the fellowship hall, and the other large room became a room that was used for children's chapel and for smaller meetings, but still very nice. And it always bothered me a little that the rooms were named after the people who gave the most money to make the room, to build the room. I mean, is the room to the glory of God, or is the room to the glory of the person who gave the money?
Ours is named after Martin Luther. It's the Martin Luther room.
Right, which makes, to me, at least,
And the Jacksons?
perfect sense. I mean, you would, or, the fellowship hall, or...
I think the fellowship hall is named after Pastor Sedlin, who died. He was like, forever, I think it's
Right.
his memory.
Which is all great. It's not like the person that forked over the cash. But as we would gather for the Rector's Forum, which was what we called the coffee hour between the 2 services, and it was a big room, a lot of people in there. Each Sunday, about in the middle of the time, a gentleman would come in, walk around the back of the room, go over to where the coffee and donuts were, take a cup of coffee, grab a donut or two, and leave. None of us, including me, approached him. None of us asked how he was doing. None of us invited him to stick around. He was that homeless guy. And I suppose, although this wasn't my perception, or my feeling, that at least as far as I'm aware, some people thought what a fine thing it is we're doing in this parish with this enormous budget, letting him take a couple of our donuts. Contrasted with the guy who was an usher, who was a lieutenant in the Milwaukee Police Department, who, if somebody came in shady into the narthex during a service, had no problem with putting him against the wall and patting him down. And I didn't really learn about that until I was almost out of there. Not that I could have done anything about it. But when it comes to talking about treating all people with dignity and respect, pretty much ignoring a person who comes in every week. I mean, most churches would beg for another person who came in every week, and yet that one was ignored, which reminds me of a story in Texas of the Episcopal priest who was hired in a parish that wanted to grow, and in the first year he added 250 new members, which is enormous, and was fired because, well, they were the wrong people. I mean, they were largely unemployed, some of them homeless, some of them underemployed, and I mean, it wasn't those people we wanted. It wasn't, like they were good conservatives. And Mark has that thing that we talked about a little bit last week, where what's pure is what's majority. What's clean is the way most things are, the way most people are. And we get that tied up and confused with morality. So the woman with the daughter who had an unclean spirit was deemed to have the unclean spirit because, well, most people didn't do the things she did. And in a culture that doesn't really understand the transmission of disease, everything's potentially catching. And I don't know that we've come so far from that, really. I mean, we probably understand that you can't catch height and you can't catch hair color, but short of that, the way we avoid people that are different, and sometimes like the plague, pun intended, and yet Jesus seems almost drawn to people who are excluded, almost like a magnet, like iron filings to a magnet. And ultimately they killed them for it. Because we so value the status quo. But here's something to ponder. If all beings have Buddha nature, and if you don't like Buddha nature, we can call it God nature. I think it's the same thing. I heard the Buddha described in the last week as God, or not the Buddha, but Buddhism believing in God unmanifest. So it's not that they don't believe in it's truly not that they don't believe in a God. Buddha just refused to get involved in that whole discussion. But whether we're talking about, we might say that in Buddhism, you could argue that divinity is in interconnectedness, the fact that we're all related. Divinity manifests in relationship. Divinity manifests in that we all have Buddha nature. If we all, underneath all of our crap that we've accumulated, courtesy of our life experiences having thrown it on top of us, if underneath all that, if we could clear it away, it would be true that we are all shining like the sun. If we knew that, and if we accepted it and acted like it, how much harder would it be to just dismiss people out of hand? how then could you look at somebody and say, oh, they aren't worth much? And this idea is really helpful to me, even though I admit it's slippery, in the sense that it's hard to grab it. But Eastern religions sometimes talk about two levels of reality. And I like to think of it, I changed the language a little because I like it better. There is temporal reality, what seems to be going on this earth. The reality that says that we know that every particle in this chair is constantly in motion, that it really isn't solid. And that's ultimate reality. Because the truth is, if we don't see it and walk up to it and whack our shin on it, it feels solid as can be and it hurts like heck. That's temporal reality. We make distinctions based on temporal reality and decide who's acceptable and who's not, who we like and who we don't, who we're going to sit with and who we aren't, based on temporal reality, the social structures we've erected, what the neighbors will think, even politics. But ultimately, none of that is real. It's all convention. And we've decided, we've sort of agreed to say, yeah, that's how it is. But in a way, it's all a game of make-believe. And what's real is that Buddha nature, or that God nature, or that human potential, if you must. So how do we move from the person who everything in our nature tells us we shouldn't sit down and break bread with? And I'm not talking about people who seem to be a physical danger. I mean, a lunatic with a samurai sword talking to God aloud in the corner is not somebody you should have a cup of coffee with, okay? But short of that, how do we move beyond it? Because I feel those same inclinations.
But what if that lunatic standing out in the corner with a samurai sword talking to God is exactly who you should talk to? I mean,
For me?
But I'm just
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'll take that chance.
yeah, just devil's advocate right there.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, I definitely see what you're saying, but yeah.
I think it is, so many times that we do have to, and even those of us who make a point of being aware of how we react to the other, or whatnot, that there are things that I've noticed that I guess were kind of ingrained in me, and it wasn't until I had a professor pointed out that so many of us were guilty of it and didn't even realize. But, like driving through certain neighborhoods and locking your car doors. And, I'm the type of person that I will talk to anybody I respect. I don't fear other groups. I don't, nothing like that. And I'm not actively prejudiced. Or at least I don't believe that I am. But she asked us, she's like, how many of you? And, we'll drive to certain neighborhoods and think to lock your door because of the neighborhood you're in. What is that saying about how you view these people? And then she went on to say that, unfortunately, for a lot of us, it just becomes ingrained because our parents do it. And then from an early age, it's what we see. And so it just becomes something that we don't even really think about. It just, it's like almost second nature. But, for me, once that was kind of highlighted, after that, I made a conscious point to be more aware that it's like, why am I doing this? Why do I feel the need to?
But devil's advocating back to your devil. If it's a neighborhood that you've seen 3 times in the news in the past week, somebody got carjacked.
Yeah.
Are you biased against the neighborhood or the people? I don't know.
cause us to shy away from certain situations, or walk away from the lunatic on the corner. That it's just things that it doesn't reflect badly on us. It doesn't mean that we're not trying to follow this example, follow what Christ would have us do. We're human and we're not perfect. So it's that kind of almost.
I think
It's a matter of being more mindful of why we're doing the things we're doing. Talk about there might be a good reason why we're locking our car door. But I mean, you're talking about you just do it automatically. You don't think why you're doing it, but maybe just having that awareness that I'm doing it, and whether the reason is a good one or not, that's something you can't really judge. But just I am locking my door because I am feeling threatened. Whether I should or not, I don't know, but I feel threatened, and so that's why I did it.
Yeah, that's really good.
I can come at this from a very different perspective, but it fits in here. This week I was asked to kind of lead a little memorial service at one of my buildings because of one of the long-term residents there had died, and he had been living there with his mother, who got spirited away because when he was gone, there wasn't going to be enough money for her. There was the family that was involved was really not good. And my compassion went out for the mother. This is, for various reasons. And before I was asked to do the memorial, I was talking with the administrator about the circumstances, and I don't want to get into any more detail because I don't want anything out there. But she started talking about issues with the gentleman who died and how deceptive he was and various things that allegedly had been part of his life story that were very negative. And I remember saying to one of the relatives that was there initially after the death, if he's a veteran, you can get these supports. Oh, he's not a veteran. My understanding is that he was, No, that's just another one of his many lies. Oh. Well, then I'm asked, can you do this memorial service? Because, he lived here all this time, and he was a veteran, and he was a prisoner of war, and all this stuff. And I have this inner,
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, wait a minute. Regardless of what the truth is, and I don't know what the truth is, nevertheless, he is a child of God with dignity and value. And it's not my place to even raise any of these questions with the community members that are saying, we're upset because his family chose not to have any kind of a memorial service. And some of us here knew the two of them and want to have some closure. Would you please do a service? But, so the reason I'm thinking I'm seeing a connection here is it all happened inside my head, and I don't know what the truth is.
Right.
Except that someone was a member of that community and the mother for all this time, and they wanted to, and I didn't actually, not very many people there knew him well at all. and when I've done these before, it's been somebody who's come to my things that I knew well, and all I could do was sort of put together a structure and say, what do you want to share as memories? But recognizing that I was struggling with what prayers do I put in, because I'm not prepared necessarily to say, we give thanks for the wonderful life and all the ways this person did all of these good, but that doesn't matter. There are still things that can be prayed and thoughts that can be offered in.
Yeah. It bothers me that sometimes we evaluate people as if we've never made mistakes. And I think, I should say, I don't think anybody in this room right now would have a problem saying, yeah, I've made mistakes in my life. And yeah, well, except for you. That goes without saying. And yet, we tend to evaluate other people, public figures probably more than private figures, but as if we've never made a mistake. And can you live an absolutely scurrilous life, but then in your retirement, be somebody else, and so the people you interacted with develop an affection for you, and that kind of, I think, is a parallel to what the Dalai Lama was talking about the self-esteem thing, and how those kinds of decisions are really culturally determined and really an instance of temporal reality. And yet I hear your conflictedness because how do you not violate your own integrity in terms of what you're saying? It's sort of like, there have to be some people. Well, that's a bad example. But people who were Nazi prison guards, let's just say, did what they did. The war ended. They went on with another life that was exemplary, and then it was found out, maybe after their death, that that's who they were, and is it fair to make the whole judgment who they were? I mean,
well, and the question goes, suppose we were asked, somebody said, my brother-in-law was a son of a gun, ended up, in prison for whatever horrible things, and now is dead, but I want the funeral. Never repented, never wondered, does that person nevertheless have Buddha nature?
Oh yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, and so do I, are we called, regardless, to treat all people with dignity and respect, even if they continue to behave as son of a guns?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't know where they've been.
I'm sorry, what, Beth?
We don't know what they've gone through. I think of the quote, before you judge the splinter in your neighbor's eye, look at the boulder in your own.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Well, and, someone else once said, how could it be that Jesus let that thief on the that asked him, how could he let him into heaven right away? Does that mean that you can just do whatever you want your whole life long, and at the last minute, yeah, it kind of does. And you know what? Some of us might say, maybe even we don't have to know that for sure that you repented. God may choose somehow anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's that whole thing that if you don't actually tell somebody else you've repented, you couldn't possibly have, which sort of says you cannot have personal boundaries. for crying out loud. And I think your point, Beth, is well taken. One of the ways I've sometimes heard the obscuration of Buddha nature described as sort of like stuff that accumulates on your windshield, you know, dead bugs, or it might be mud, you know, or whatever flaps up there. But depending on what has particularly accumulated on somebody's Buddha nature, if it's fertilizer, they could smell pretty bad. But it doesn't mean that what's under there isn't still Buddha nature. I talked to somebody last week, I think it was, who didn't know why Jones Island smelled. So I was so proud because I've recently learned why Milorganite is called Milorganite. Organic nitrous fertilizer. Yeah, and it works. But I said if you consider that that what it's made from is essentially sewage, and when you open up the bag, it doesn't especially smell like sewage anymore. But there's this transformation that occurs, and you could very well be eating produce that was fertilized by somebody's toilet flushings. But that's like, you know, Buddha nature. What's underneath all that is good. It's those middle stages.
Talk about everywhere I drive, past somebody with a homeless sign. I drive in the city a lot. And I'm always like, do I give money? Or, I mean, I guess the right thing to do is go to McDonald's and, you know, do I give money? And I feel terribly guilty if my purse is in the trunk and I can't reach it. So I never know what the answer is for that.
I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer for that. I think ultimately it's, you know, I don't think you need to feel guilty, you know, because if your purse is out of reach,
Yeah.
you know, it's not on you, you know, if you had it readily available, you would probably stop. So, I mean, but I don't think there is a right or wrong. That's got to be, you know, each person. And I mean, sometimes it's not even about the money, just the acknowledgement that they're there. You know, even just saying, you know, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now, but, you know, I'll keep you in my prayers or whatever. You know, offering that sort of just recognition that they're there and that, you know, you see them. That could, you know, maybe help them more than, you know, a bucks will. Because I think, you know, so many times, and unfortunately there are the ones that are kind of running a scam. You know, Craig and I were talking about stuff like that this morning, and it's unfortunately, it's the few bad apples or whatever that give bad rap, you know, be it, you know, religious groups, it's the extremists, it's the few extremists that give it the bad name. You know, with any religion. I think it's the same with any other like subset of our culture, that it's the ones who are, you know, abusing situations that they make it bad for everybody. And so there are people who legitimately do need help, and they're often ignored or whatever else because of the few that, you know, are not, you know, legitimately in need. But I think so many times just the recognition that you recognize their existence and being like, you know, I see you and I can't help you right now, but, you know, I see you. That can maybe just go a long way.
I like that because I remember when I was growing up, and my dad would always say, when somebody approaches you when we're walking in the city, you don't look at them. You look away, like pretend they're not there. And you want to make eye contact. So that's kind of the way I grew up. But what I've learned is they're there. You have to acknowledge. You have to acknowledge, and that's what makes us so uncomfortable. I mean, I don't think we need to feel guilty, but we need to realize that's another person with human nature. So I try to make eye contact, but I always realize I'm going to make eye contact. I'm just going to ask me for something, you know. But I always try to do that. I try to, you know, I almost always say no, and I say sorry, I don't have anything, or whatever. But try to establish that relationship. As hard as it is to do. I mean, I do. I just wish he wasn't there.
Right.
Oh no! You see it coming. You know. You see the guy. You want to turn the other way. But I think that's the challenge for all of us. Is just to see that person, treat them with whatever dignity you can.
Remember Lionel Aldridge? Well, you don't. Lionel Aldridge was a Packer glory years in the 60s. He was a defensive end. And then he was a sportscaster on Channel 4 for a while. And Lionel was also schizophrenic. And I don't think he was diagnosed until after he had retired, but at different points in his post-football existence, he went from, you know, being a sizable, literally and metaphorically, media presence here in Milwaukee to being homeless and on the street and having sold his Super Bowl ring for money to exist. And that's, you know, if you didn't know who Lionel was, I remember when I worked at Marshall Fields after I graduated from high school and while I was going to college, and Lionel would come in and buy his suits from us. And there was no missing when Lionel was there because the guy was huge for the time. Now he's small probably. But you don't know if that person on the corner is on the corner because of illness or what the circumstances were. I think he drove a bus for a while, a city bus then. You just don't know. So it's hard, but I agree, it's uncomfortable.
I had the experience one time in Washington, D.C. At the time I was working on my dissertation at the Brookings Institute, and I would go to daily mass. And about the third time, I walked up past the person sitting on the stairs going, "Give me money." And I said, "No, gotta go in and pray." This letter of James kind of hit me. So on the way back, I said, "Let's go have lunch." And took him in to a fast food place to get something picked up, and it was really interesting how I was treated for the fact he's with me. You know, and it gave me a chance to feel the disdain with which he was constantly being treated.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience where I went with somebody like, and they proceeded to yell at me for bringing this person in and encouraging that behavior. And I try my best to be respectful in any place that I am, but I let them have it. I was not going to stand for that. And but it's true that, you know, we don't often see that side of it. It's really eye-opening.
I don't know, but I need to do some research on homeless shelters, but I'm thinking of renting up a car, because I mean, it's so prevalent in like every day on this board. When I work, it'd be like, I can't keep doing them.
Well, that's part of it too.
But what if I get a car that says, here's the 211, impact 211? Maybe let them borrow my phone so they can make that phone call. Because I think Milwaukee has good resources. I have a resource book, but, you know, we're lucky that we live in a city that has that many resources. I don't know.
And this is part of me that says I would be hesitant to hand them your phone.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're saying.
And is that right or wrong?
No, I know what you're saying.
No, that's, I mean, that's human nature. It is, I don't think it's right or wrong. It's just, you have to,
Be careful, you know, I know.
unfortunately, because there are unfortunately ones like that. Right.
I've never had any problems at all. If you want to have problems, we will. Somebody stole from me in the building. But I've been in the inner city for at least 10 years. I have one problem. None. And I don't even lock my doors. I'm like, you know what I mean? I guess it's all a matter of perspective, I guess.
Should we pray? Let us offer the joys and concerns of our lives.